Welcome, everyone. It's 6 o'clock on Monday night, and you're listening to the 65th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour on www.hamiltonradio.net, Channel 2. I'm your host, Greg Rapport. I'm the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels, 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Age Out Angels provides one-to-one mentors to vulnerable youth for the purpose of coordinating the care and services that they need to survive. We try to help youth avoid some of the horrible pitfalls that they're likely to face if they don't have a proper safety net. And this program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G, William Saunders, Ruben Rodriguez, and all the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime. Ruben is on the big board tonight, along with Robin producing. Greetings to both of you. Season's greetings to both of you. Happy Hanukkah if you go in that direction. Merry Christmas if I'm a couple of weeks ahead of time. And thank you so much at home for tuning in. We've put together what I hope you will find to be an insightful and compelling view. Did I say insulting? Insightful and compelling view of the child welfare system. So get ready, because tonight on the Radio Hour, this is a really special one. We have a special topic and a special expert on the subject. You know, I got into education in 1975, and from the first day until today, I've watched change after change be shoved down my throat in the education system, and it was always touted as the next great thing. So in 43 years, I've seen two that showed promise. The first was actually an individualized instruction method that demonstrated some pretty positive results, but it doesn't work if there are more than a 14-to-1 student-teacher ratio. So it's unrealistic to think it could be funded, you know, on a public school scale. The second one is the one we're going to talk about tonight. It's called community schools. My guest is Greg Stankiewicz, coordinator of the New Jersey Community Schools Coalition. Greg, welcome to the Radio Hour.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here.
So just for the record, two Gregs tonight. I think our voices are different enough that they could tell us apart, and probably visually too. But two Gregs. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to take one moment and tell our listeners that this is not something you want to keep to yourselves. So please find me on Facebook right now. Go to my name, Greg Rapport. Even if you're listening on Hamilton Radio, hit that share button or email your whole address book. That'd be great. And tell everyone to go to www.hamiltonradio.net, Channel 2. Tell the world what we're talking about here. Community schools is something that deserves to be shared with the whole world. Keeping this a secret is a bad idea. So don't keep this private to yourself. Help us share it. And while you're doing that, let me remind you that we're here every Monday from 6 to 7 p.m. with the Age Out Angels Radio Hour. We have a great lineup of guests coming up next week. December 10th, we're going to be talking about adoption with Adoptions from the Heart. And I'll also be having a conversation with Peg Gould from Mercer County Community College. Then on December 17th, our last show of the year, we're going out with a bang. We're going to show you how once great cities like Trenton, Philadelphia, Camden, any urban area near you where you live are systemically turned into ghettos, and you are not going to like what you hear. This makes people very, very uncomfortable, and we're not shying away from it, because community is at the root of the child welfare crisis in this country. That is the root cause of the child welfare crisis. Also, Janice Kanuski from New Jersey 211 will be back co-hosting with me on December 17th, so do not miss that show. Be sure to tune in every Monday at 6 p.m. for our unfiltered look at the child welfare system. This is where you come to get the whole truth, and I can almost guarantee that what you're going to hear tonight you are not going to hear in the nightly news. So stay with us for the whole hour, and you can call in any time and ask a question of either of the two Gregs. The number is 609-807-2492. Again, 609-807-2492. So let's get to our guest, Greg Stankiewicz. Greg, the concept of community schools, even though it was new to me a couple of weeks ago and new to our audience tonight, this is not all that new, is it? This has been developing.
Absolutely. It's actually, the concept really goes back to the real conception of what public education should be. So when John Dewey talked and wrote about what public education should be way back, you know, he nurtured and he championed the idea that a school should be not just a school, but a hub for the community around it. And so engaging the students means also engaging their families and allowing them to understand their place in the community and allowing the community to come in and help nurture those students as they become their citizens themselves.
So is that the 30-second definition of what community school is, or do you have it laid out more succinctly?
I think what the 30-second definition is number one, it's not a program, it's a strategy. And so that strategy changes from place to place depending on the needs of the community surrounding each school. But it's a strategy that is really designed to focus on the student, to allow them to have a better education by helping them overcome the other barriers in their lives that keep them from getting to the education and the outcome that they were looking for. And so by doing that, you bring in your partners from the community. You bring in the organizations like your organization and others and other nonprofits and for-profits, those who are interested in helping reduce these barriers so that the students themselves and through the students, the families, can have better outcomes.
You know, I think over the years, the way that's kind of been distorted is that each new problem that arises has somehow been heaped on either the school or the police. And I hope at some point we can have a show on community policing as well, because I think community schools and community policing kind of go hand in hand, right?
Absolutely.
But what's happened is we've somehow managed to just heap the problems on those two institutions without all of the other, component parts that you just described to make it a forgive the word, holistic approach, to helping these young people. And what's happened to this point just feels like it's failed, so we need to take a step in this direction. So what got you involved in this? Let's go back in time. Where'd you go to school?
I graduated from Harvard University,
Okay.
and that was back in 1984. My first job was as an intern at an educational foundation focused on disadvantaged youth. Through that internship, which was a wonderful experience for me, I was able to get a position, my first real job, at what was then the New York City Board of Education. So it was the way for me to really understand how education works in the largest district in the United States,
Yeah.
with all the problems and all the politics involved. But when I was there, it was fascinating because one of my jobs was to set up training programs for teachers and administrators. And I was doing that within the schools themselves. And I found that many teachers were either too scared or just too nervous about going into some of their own schools, or schools in other neighborhoods. And at that time, I was also hearing about a wonderful organization called Children's Aid Society in New York City.
Right.
And they were experimenting with the concept of community schools. And I loved that. And for some reason, it really hit me working in an environment where we were cutting ourselves off from the communities around us.
Yeah, yeah.
Instead, this was a way of bringing communities together with the schools. So this was back in 1986, 87. I loved the concept. I decided to go back to graduate school. And in writing my essay for graduate school, I put together a proposal to pilot the community school.
Okay. So you
idea.
really jumped in both feet.
I just thought it was something that was, and I was really, really happy to see that Children's Aid Society did exactly that without my help at that time.
Right. They
But
were pioneers?
They were one of the real pioneers.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're pioneering a concept that was also used by Jane Addams way back, the turn of the last century, in terms of the settlement house movement and bringing services into people who need these services.
Yeah.
So they're building off of a real base. But since then, and I think you're absolutely right, Greg, in the last 8 years or so, there's been a real resurgence of interest in this concept, and the number of community schools across the nation has tripled over the last 7 years, and it's about 7,500 across the country right now.
Wow. So back then, were you able to make any inroads into proliferating the concept?
I actually ended up coming back here to New Jersey,
Okay.
but not in education. I actually was doing a lot of work as well in fiscal issues. So I worked for our state at the
Okay.
Office of Management and Budget, and now and then in community development, which was another of my loves. So I'm now coming back into education again, and with a little bit more of a background, because I believe that community schools brings together the concepts of community economic development along with public education. So I'm hoping to be able to help.
So along the way, you went to graduate school. You got a PhD at
Yes.
some point, and what are those things in? What were your major pursuits for those?
Public policy.
Public policy.
Yeah.
And you served as a chief operating officer of New Jersey Community Capital. What I don't even know what that means.
So New Jersey Community Capital is our largest community development financial institution in New Jersey. It's a nonprofit as well, but it finances community facilities in poor, low-income areas across the state. It's a team that does a wonderful job, very creative in terms of bringing financing to areas that need it, whether rural or urban or, in suburban areas. I learned a tremendous amount working there. And one of the things I found was that the organization was doing great work in many different places, financing pre-kindergarten programs, financing healthcare facilities, but they weren't doing as much with public schools as I thought we could do. So one of the things when I left there, what I vowed to myself is to see if there are ways of trying to bring services like that and bring down the barriers that keep organizations like that, nonprofit organizations like that, away from our districts and our public schools.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, I think the tough question here is, do you get a lot of pushback from the schools? And I don't mean it like in a mean, negative way, but you have different interests. You have the interests of the administration in a school. You got a union. And you got to be careful what you say on the air about the union, because it sounds like you're colluding if if you say the wrong things. But the reality is that there are different fiefdoms in a school that have different interests. So do you find, generally speaking, that you get pushback from the school itself?
I think the thing that we're finding the most here in New Jersey is that the concept of community schools isn't that well known yet. So the coalition that I coordinate is a coalition of wonderful stakeholders across the state, and the idea is to try to bring that concept and that model and that strategy of community schools and make it better known so that people can better understand that it's a strategy that may work for them. So in some places there's pushback. We've got almost over 600 districts here in New Jersey, so you've got a lot of
You got 800 opinions.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But what I love about the community school model, and I think we'll delve
get
into
the
that
details,
later.
yeah.
But one of the bases of that is a collaborative leadership structure that brings the teachers, administrators, and students, and families, and unions sort of together, and that's the most powerful way of doing it. And so that's one of the things that really draws me to the model, because it's collaborative rather than. And as you said, there's so many things that have been imposed from above on our schools over the last 30 or 40 years. I was at a national conference this past week at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and at the summary at the end, they said something exactly along the lines of what you said in the introduction, that people in schools get confused because it's one wave after another of the next reform.
Right.
And this really goes back to what is public education, and it really goes back to the idea of let's use public education to bring all of us together. There's so few institutions now that bring all of us together.
That's right. Yeah.
And that use it to focus on making sure that our students grow into strong citizens of this country.
All they can be.
All they can be, and knowing what their power is as a citizen, knowing, and so that engagement, I think, is very important as well.
Fantastic. If you just joined us, I'm with Greg Stankiewicz, and we're going to be talking about some very intense details about community schooling coming up. So if you haven't hit that share button on Facebook yet, you better do it right now, because we need you. We need you out there to help us spread the word. We're going to take a short break, back in 45 seconds, and I think you're going to find this totally enlightening. So stay right where you are. And we are back with Greg Stankiewicz, coordinator of the New Jersey Community Schools Coalition. Hey, big shout out to our friend Lynn Tonini, founder of the Aging Out Institute. Aging Out Institute has partnered with Amazon through their affiliate program to compile a list of books and movies about older youth in foster care and aging out of foster care. And what this means is that whenever someone clicks to one of these books through the Aging Out website, ends up purchasing it, AOI will receive a small percentage of the purchase price, and there's nothing bad about that. The list that they have going is just a start. They're adding more books every week, and keep checking back. It's www.agingoutinstitute.org. Scroll down to books and movies about aging out and click on that. Again, www.agingoutinstitute.org. And I have to tell you, one of the books that totally caught my eye this week, I hadn't thought of in a while, is a book called Conversations with Bobby, From Foster Child to Corporate Executive. And it's a book written by Bob Danzig. And I don't know if any of you guys out there know who Bob Danzig is, but he was the CEO of Hearst Newspapers. Very, very heavy hitter in the corporate publishing world. And I knew him for a while when I started to get into Age Out Angels because he was a foster kid. And I'll never forget this. I was having coffee with him in a Starbucks one morning, and he told me that he graduated high school at the age of 16. And I said, well, dude, you must have been pretty smart, because you can call an 83-year-old guy dude. I said, you must have been pretty smart. And he said, no, I really wasn't. I had moved so many placements that they lost all of my birth records, and they had no idea how old I was. So they just threw me in a senior class and graduated me. Oh, no. So Conversations with Bobby is him looking back as an adult on himself as a youth, and reflecting on how he felt then, and how he feels now about all that. And I mean, one story that'll just kill you is that he never had a pair of shoes that fit him. Always the shoes had to be like at least 1 or 2 sizes too big, and he could still feel, even as an 80-year-old, he can still feel the newspaper stuffed in the front to make the shoe fit, because they figured ultimately, eventually, he would grow into it, So if you get a chance to go on the Aging Out Institute website and you feel like buying a book that's guaranteed to make you cry, try Conversations with Bobby. While you're crying, you'll really open up your eyes to what a foster child is actually feeling. So back with Greg Stankiewicz, and we're going to talk about the community school model. So let's start there, Greg. Tell us what the model is.
Absolutely. There's a number of different conceptions of it, and it's, very, as I said, very responsive. The one I like to use is the 4 pillars that were envisioned by the Learning Policy Institute. And so the model consists of aspects of each of these 4 pillars. The first one is providing integrated student supports. So as part of that, these are services outside of just education to help the students overcome the barriers. But an important aspect of that is that there has to be a dedicated coordinator in each community school that'll be in charge of not only prioritizing what the needs are for the students and for the community, but also reaching out to the various community partners and bringing them in. And if you don't have a dedicated person doing that, then you don't have the ability to really push this through.
You don't have the focus.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, you know what, it sounds like a full-time job plus.
Absolutely.
It really does, because, I mean, what we're talking about here, when we're talking about integrated student supports, we're talking about including things like mental health
Yes.
supports and physical health services. So, I mean, we're talking about things that can have time requirements of the person who's coordinating them. So, you know, I'm wondering if one person is enough, but we'll leave it there for the moment. Okay. What's the next pillar?
The next pillar is the expanded learning time and opportunities. So expanding the school day and school year in order to provide a safe haven and services throughout the time. So just as an example, I serve as a board member for my local Board of Education. We're actually a very wealthy district, but we do have a poverty rate of around 16%, and that's probably understates because we have students who are undocumented as well. So many of those students have food during the day at school, but on weekends and during the summer, they went home and they didn't have access to the type of regular food that their colleagues and their friends had. So we have a nonprofit who's come in and provides the weekend backpacks of food. It's done in a way that it's not stigmatizing, but it means that those students, when they come in on Monday morning, they're ready to learn rather than being hungry. So that's just one example.
Sure, and also, I mean, school buildings is school building. It's there. We're paying for it, you know, whether it's closed or open, right? Where it still costs what it costs. So keeping it open.
Absolutely. And over the last 30, 40, 50 years in many communities, the school is sort of closed off after school hours. And many residents sort of see it as a fortress almost. The idea is let's break down those walls, bring the community in. And like you said, it belongs to the community. So let's use it as a way of, for example, families who may not know English very well, they can learn English after school hours while their children are playing basketball. In many communities, they put in laundromats, so that because that's
absolutely
a very difficult, you know, for a child who doesn't have clean laundry.
Right.
It's hard for them to go to school. It's
Absolutely.
stigmatizing.
Yes.
So they can do their laundry while they're taking lessons, while they're playing in the basketball leagues in the evening. It just extends the school day and allows for a richer array of services.
Yeah, and again, I hope that everyone out there realizes that this is not heaped entirely on the school. The idea is to bring community partners in to take care of some of this business, you know, I guess to get the kids just ready to learn, right?
Absolutely.
Because a perfect world would be one where a student comes to class fed, clean, you know, clear of mind. Because a lot of kids in inner cities are facing trauma situations, right? So fed, clothed, clear of mind, and slept, you know, well rested, and ready to learn, so that a teacher can then do their job.
Exactly.
Right. That's
Exactly.
kind of the point of it, and so, you know, I hope people don't think that it just means keeping kids in school like it's a prison after hours. But I got to tell you this: you ask any Trenton police, and they will tell you that the worst time of their day is when school lets out. So if that could be done in a more staggering sort of way so that everyone wouldn't be piling out. And of course, you know, 50, 60 years ago when a lot of these schools were built, they were built in an era that wasn't like this. So they would put like the middle school right down the street from the high school, right? And it was all wonderfully convenient the way community was structured. Only now it's horrible because the high school dismisses the same time the middle school does, and then you have older kids mixing with younger kids that we really, you know, don't really need. Next thing you know, it's a problem where the police have to get involved, and the last thing they want to do is police teenagers. Right? And a lot of that could be mitigated just by staggering the dismissal, but having a reason, you know, to not just stagger it like a Band-Aid.
Absolutely, and having the knowledge. So by opening yourself up as a school to the community, you bring that knowledge in,
Right.
and you bring the support in, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
often a business will then pay for some of these services. We proposed this in Princeton, where I'm a member of the Board of Education. We had a member of the public stand up at that meeting and say, if you do this, I will personally pay for the first washing machine, to put into the school, because I think that's so important, and it really touched me.
That's beautiful. He was feeling the spirit.
Yes.
Wow, you should hit him for the dryer at the same. Why let him go with just a washing machine? He's got the spirit, right? Yeah. Okay, what's the third pillar?
The third one is what we had talked about a little bit before, which is the collaborative leadership and practice, bringing people together. And this is a model that really requires that. It can't be imposed from top down. And so it requires the input of teachers and of community members, and it requires really doing a needs assessment, which is going in and prioritizing the needs and systematically trying to figure out how you develop approaches to each of those needs. So, Greg, you talked about mental health.
Right.
Here in Mercer County, a year and a half ago, all the superintendents got together and declared a mental health crisis because of the problems that are facing our youth. We have very, very high rates of suicide and attempted suicide, and just the need. And so when I and a co-author of mine, Julie Borst, did an assessment here in New Jersey for the needs of what our school districts and superintendents are asking for, one of the things that came up the most, whether it was rural areas or suburban or urban areas, was mental health help.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's trauma in many of our communities, but there's also lots of other sort of threats. If you're an undocumented family right now, it's a very stressful time.
Oh, goodness.
Just there's so much, and I would argue just in general, we're asking our youth to bear a much larger burden in terms of mental health. And so you and I had the opportunity to visit a community school here in Trenton that provides mental health services from before the school opens till after it closes. Right. It's there. Whoever needs it, whenever they need it, they go downstairs to a team from Mercer Street Friends. And it's not just the students. What struck me when we went to see was that it's the teachers as well. If for some reason something happens that is a burden for them, they can go downstairs and just get a safe space and relax a little bit. And that makes it better for the students and for the teachers. Yeah. It makes it a better environment.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people out there don't realize is that the secondary problem of mental health in an urban area is that it's not cool to need mental health help. And now, coming from a middle class area, I'd go to a shrink in a heartbeat. It wouldn't faze me in the least. Wouldn't faze me to talk about. Wouldn't stigmatize me or anything like that. If I'm treading some new ground in life and I don't have a guide to get me there, nothing wrong with going to a psychiatrist and having that kind of treatment. But in the urban community, that is considered so not cool to express your feelings, in any way, to express your confusion. And if that could be made something easily accessible,
yes,
right? Easily accessible, and maybe for a young student, private, right?
Absolutely.
So that they wouldn't have to go through the whole machination of having to explain it in order to get help. Because I believe the last thing you could do when you need mental health help is try to explain the mental health help you need. It just, it doesn't make sense. So that being a part of that is really important. Now, what I'm looking at here, collaborative leadership and practice, parents, students, teachers, principals, and community partners build a culture of professional learning, collective trust, and shared responsibility. But somebody's got to be in charge, right?
Yes.
So what's the top down of that?
It's really a top down, but side to side as well, and bottom up. So, for example, in community schools, you often will have a lead agency, which can be a nonprofit agency, that works as a partner with the school, with the superintendent and the principal. So here in Trenton, the two community schools that are operating right now with Mercer Street Friends, Mercer Street Friends is the lead agency. And so they learn together, they govern together. The principal of a school will always be in charge of the school.
I would think.
But it's we met the wonderful principal at Rivera, Bernadette Trapp, and over time, she and her team and the Mercer Street Friends team have worked together and learned to trust each other and learned to really work together as a team.
Yeah.
And that's what the model is looking towards, of bringing people together.
Yeah.
So, like you said, teachers have such a difficult time right now. They're being asked to do more and more than just teach, and it's not fair to the teachers.
Right.
They need some help as well. And so this is a way of extending that, and so that they don't have to be psychologists or
Social workers.
Or whatever. Yeah. They have support there, so they can focus on doing what they want to do best and know what to do best, which is to teach our students.
And for those of you out there, I have to tell you that what Greg and I saw a couple of weeks ago was a model of how that actually can work effectively. So we're not just sitting here in a radio studio singing Kumbaya. This can actually work, and we've seen it in action, that people really and truly can get along, when they share common goals and they come at it with different areas of expertise and respect each other's expertise. And yes, the principal still is in charge.
Yes.
No question about that. So the fourth pillar.
And the fourth pillar is really the reaching out for active family and community engagement. And we've talked a lot about that already, but it's the way of, for many, even very low-income neighborhoods that don't have a lot of additional resources. And here in New Jersey, I think all our listeners know that over the last 9 years, public education has been underfunded to the tune of over $9 billion.
Amazing, yeah.
So it's a tremendous amount to have to make up. This is a way of identifying their needs and seeing what other resources are available to help pay for some of these needs.
So the school functions as a neighborhood hub. It's, 200 years ago, there was a community meeting place. I mean, that's what there was. And then maybe that grew into like a community center, which was different from the school. And this sort of restores that central meeting location.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
To the school. So all of the various programming, brought about by the partner organizations and stuff like that is all designed to make it a place people want to be.
And a very good, very small example of that is when I was growing up, you'd go to your local school to vote. Now, with a lot of fear of school security, many schools are saying, no, we have to lock it down. So let's find somewhere else for citizens to vote.
Yeah.
But it's the exact opposite of what we want. We want the community to be engaged, and there are ways of doing that safely, but doing that on so many different diverse ways that bring us together.
And it's for more than just the students. It's for the whole family.
Yes.
To be a part of that, if whether it's English as a second language or something pure fun.
Or job training. I mean, it reflects what every school needs and every community needs, but it's almost an infinite amount of possibilities of bringing people together. And now here today in the United States, we have so few places where we can bring people together and make them feel a commonality.
Yeah.
And I think our schools are one of those institutions that need to be nurtured. And this is one way of doing that.
Yeah, we get together a lot and think of what we can do to make schools better and after-school programs and stuff like that. And we think of good, intelligent things. But frequently it gets pointed out to us that we never think of things that are fun, except for basketball. Okay, yeah, we can play basketball. So, and it occurs to me that you take a school that the kids just can't wait to get out of, right? And then offer them a hip-hop dance class, after school. Something that they want, and something that would make them say, oh, yeah, I'd really like to be here. So you have this hip hop dance class, and then maybe you serve them a little food, and take a break and say, okay, it's homework hour. Now we'll get our homework done, and we'll come back from that, and we'll dance some more. And then all of a sudden, it becomes another place to live, and that is so much safer than the streets, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, so you're serving a whole lot of masters there
Yes.
as you do that. So you've just worn them out with physical activity, given them something that they feel really good about doing that they can then just show off to their friends, gotten their homework done. There's ways to do this that make a whole lot of sense. And this model accounts for all of those things.
Here in New Jersey, we've taken the Department of Education has made the decision that one of the items that they're going to report back to the federal government is the rates of chronic absenteeism, which are very high in many of our schools.
Yeah.
So, Greg, you're absolutely right. If you can engage the student, make them want to be in the school, then those rates of absenteeism go down. The research is very, very strong on that.
Sure.
This is a great way of doing that.
Sure, absolutely. Now we're going to take a short break for just a minute, take a deep breath, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit about where it's going to go from here. So don't go away. Hit that share button on Facebook. There's still time. And we are back with Greg Stankiewicz. And before we go further, though, I do need to thank all the people who made donations to Age Out Angels this week. We thank you so very, very much for your generosity. I do have a fundraiser on Facebook right now for my birthday. I'm going to be 49 for the 15th year this year. I'm going to keep being 49 until I get it right. So if you'd be kind enough to give there, that would be wonderful. And if you have an employee giving fund or matching gifts foundation associated with your place of work, we would certainly appreciate your contacting us, telling us how we can participate in that. Private message me on Facebook or email to greg@ageoutangels.org. And I want to remind everyone that you can donate to Age Out Angels every time you make a purchase from Amazon. It won't cost you one more penny. All you have to do is designate Age Out Angels to be your Amazon Smile designee, and a portion of your payment will go to Age Out Angels without it costing you anything. I can make it easy for you to designate us as your Amazon Smile recipient. All you have to do is contact me either via Facebook or greg@ageoutangels.org, and I can send you a link that will take you directly to our designation. So you are moving this community schools idea forward. In the way I think it works best, the legislative way. It's either a law or a lawsuit. Those are the two things that drive progress. So tell us about that.
Absolutely. So the coalition is hoping to be able to move the model forward here in New Jersey,
yeah,
and get people more aware of the model and its benefits. So thanks to some very strong supporters in the legislature, we actually have legislation pending right now on both the Assembly side and the State Senate side. And it's a pilot proposal for a 5-year pilot expansion that would allow for the hiring of a community school coordinator. And we talked about how important that was. That would be outside the district, so that it would be hired for the district in 50 new schools. And those schools can be district schools. They can be charter schools. But it's for schools that are interested in the model. They think that they can bring some of their own energy and resources to the table. We'd expand it over a 3-year period. At the same time, there would be an independent evaluation done by whether it's a university or someone who's going to be picked by the Department of Education. So we are providing evidence to the legislature and to the governor that this is a program that's worth doing, that has results, and the idea being that after 5 years, they can take that and think about putting more money in to expand it even further.
Right.
And so the cost is $26 million for those 5 years. The first year cost would be $1.5 million. And so far, for people who are interested in as this bill moves into committee to follow its path, on the Assembly side, it's Assembly Bill 4078, and that is sponsored by Assemblywoman Mila J.C. and Assemblywoman Pamela Lampett. And they're the vice chair and the chair of the Education Committee on the Assembly side. But the good news as well is we have a third sponsor already here from this area, who's Assemblyman Zwicker. So we really appreciate the support there. On the Senate side, we're very appreciative to Senator Ruiz, who chairs the Senate Education Committee.
Okay.
She's the prime sponsor. And our senator from this area, Senator Shirley Turner, who's a wonderful, wonderful ally, and she's also she's co-sponsoring it as well. So they've both been introduced. We're hoping they'll be heard on both sides in committee soon, and we'll be pushing for that because we think that's a really good avenue of pushing it forward. The other element of this bill that I think is very intriguing is that it would set up an organization, a nonprofit organization, that would provide training about community schools, not just to those schools that are chosen, but to any school district or any charter school here in New Jersey that might be interested and want to learn further for the future about community schools.
And it's neat that they're willing to bring the charter school into this mix instead of, because charter schools sometimes have that reputation of being like the anti-public school, right? And so what they're doing is embracing that.
I think there was, in 2016, there was a very good piece in Shelter Force magazine written by the former executive director of the National Coalition for Community Schools. He, in that article, challenged charter schools. He said, those charter schools who really want to embed themselves in their surrounding community,
Right.
you have an opportunity by embracing the community school model. You don't have to if you don't want to. And, I know there are large chains who may not want to. But for those who do want to, this is an opportunity. And as you said, here in New Jersey, we're so fractured often on so many different levels. But I think this is something that just by definition talks about bringing people together.
Yeah.
And so that's the intent of this legislation, that we really want to reach out to any type of public school to allow them to explore how to better embed themselves in their surrounding community.
And this is not just only New Jersey,
No.
right?
No, we're
This is-
actually behind many other places.
Oh, like
so
where?
our friends in New York State, for example, have right now about $200 million a year that's carved from their foundation aid that's set aside for possible use for community school practices and models. And that gives many of the individual schools and districts a chance to experiment with it. And so they're still pushing forward, and we're thinking about how we can work together more in a regional partnership, maybe under the auspices of the National Coalition for Community Schools. But what's really exciting is that different states have different approaches, and we learn from each other.
That's right.
California does some really wonderful things. There's some wonderful community schools out there, and again, this is something we can learn from, and we really intend to do.
Yeah, there's no bragging right in being the first. Any good golfer knows you learn from the mistakes of the guy in front of you, right? That's how it goes. So now, is this just sort of intended in this pilot rollout? Is it intended for urban areas, high concentration?
We actually made the conscious decision when we're helping draft the legislation to make it as open as possible, because we want to show that it can work in urban, suburban, and rural areas. One of the places where it's working already here in New Jersey, and we were very struck by it, was up in rural Sussex County.
How about that?
Newton, which is their superintendent is wonderful and a wonderful supporter. He heard about community schools in Lehigh Valley, when he was going back to graduate school, used that as a model.
Lehigh Valley is Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so he didn't have the resources to hire anyone outside. So he himself is sort of helping spearhead the community school efforts in Newton. And he was very helpful in pushing for the concept and the legislation. And he has told us that, if he could have gotten some resources that would only help get the services in faster and more effectively and more efficiently, he found that in the space of about 8 or 9 years, his community went from about a third poor to over 55% poor, and that the population changed to a majority Latino population. And this is out in western New Jersey.
Sure.
So it's a very, very different sort of set of circumstances and barriers to try to overcome. Yeah. He didn't have the resources to do it just as a school district. By reaching out to the business community around him, to the nonprofits, he was able to help set up services that can be helpful. And one of them was after-school programming for the younger grades. Yeah. But there was a whole series of things that he's still working on. We'd like to be able to help superintendents like Superintendent Green or others in other places set it up and then use it as a model for other districts and schools
Absolutely.
Coming up afterwards.
Very nice. Whenever you ask for something, especially for a school, the first answer you automatically get is, we don't have the money. So, and honestly, I don't believe that whole argument. I truly don't. I think the money's there. If we can build giant bombs and all kinds of other stuff, the money ought to be there to educate our children. But this does have a price tag. So how does that budget play out? If I have a school now and I would like to implement community schooling, or at least begin that rollout. So what are my steps to doing that, and what do they cost?
That's one reason why we are so supportive of the legislation, to be able to do that and help. But there's federal funding as well, and federal programs. So our good friends in Patterson actually just won a third round of federal funding. It's for the next 5 years. It's going to allow them to expand from 5 community schools to 7. So it's wonderful when you can access a large pot of money like that from the federal government
Absolutely.
or from foundations.
Yeah.
But what I'm struck by, hearing from community schools from other parts of the country, is how many don't have that many resources yet, but they still are going ahead and moving forward and allowing that community school coordinator to then sort of identify sources of funding from within the community or without. So there's a flexibility there.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be wonderful to fund as much as possible. I agree with you. But it's also a reality that funding is very difficult. And this is a way of bringing services in. Just another quick example. Princeton, New Jersey is a wealthy community. We found in one of our elementary schools, a third of the students had never been to a dentist.
Oh, my God.
And so even in a place as wealthy as Princeton, you have these barriers, and it's even more so in places like Trenton and Camden and Newark. So if we can identify sources of funding to bring in dentists or medical services, and there are sources of funding that haven't been totally tapped yet. For example, nonprofit hospitals have to provide evidence to the IRS that they are providing community benefits. Community school is a wonderful way of doing that.
Yeah.
If we can link schools together with the surrounding hospitals on programs that attack problems that are upstream, medical problems that are upstream, it's much cheaper to do and much more effective and efficient.
Yeah, it's funny. When I went to school, the dentist came once a year. I mean, the dentist came to the school and gave an evaluation. It wasn't that big a deal.
And it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be, and that's the beauty, I think, of this effort, to sort of go back to that again.
And what you're saying about Princeton, I don't want to bring Princeton down, but what shocked me when we moved to Lawrenceville, which is near Princeton, was I said I wanted to move to a place that didn't have gangs. And they said every place has gangs. Even Princeton has gangs. And being a smartass, I said something like, what do? Taunt each other with double entendre? And they said, no, this is real, there's real gangs. You have to understand that wherever you live, you're now in a situation where there are people of all socioeconomic groups, there are people of all races, there are people of all various aspects of documentation, you know, who live in your area. And if you don't account for those people, it doesn't, like, problems don't get better themselves.
That's a really good point.
You know?
And just to follow up on that, when I was growing up, I can take a break?
Well, hang on. Ruben
Sure.
wants to ask a question. Ruben's down with this. Go, Ruben. We have 5 minutes. Go, go,
It'll
go.
be real quick. Since you guys are on the thing on the topic of between Trenton and Princeton, I just one question. I know you brought up there was gangs on both sides, but let me make sure I've asked this clearly. How can, you know, like you said, there's gangs, you know, pretty much everywhere. Like in Princeton, though, they're not well, you know, out there like in Trenton. Like, you know, they're not hanging on the streets and stuff like that. But how can Trenton have the same type of atmosphere style like Princeton? And what I mean is that, like in Princeton, you can still, you know, walk around without, safety-wise, you know, you could walk down pretty much any block, and the chance of you being bothered is the 90% chance of not. Rather in Trenton, it might have high probability, 80% chance of being bothered. How can that translate into Trenton, where people walk out at night and stuff like that? That's what I mean.
It's a broader question than just the schools. I totally agree with you, and that's what I love about the idea about community development and working to strengthen the community. And there's so many ways of doing it, but the research shows how important, how toxic it is to have these barriers, how important it is to try to overcome them. So I don't mean to give you a glib answer, because there is no glib answer. It's a very, very difficult thing. But Trenton has the benefit of having such a diverse, strong nonprofit community and neighborhoods and residents who care so much, and has the proximity to New York City and to Philadelphia. There's so much you can that's there already that just needs to be nurtured. But the other thing I think is very interesting, we talk about separation of schools from their communities. You know, Trenton and Princeton over, you know, in the past were very, very close by. There was a trolley that ran back and forth. So Paul Robeson's brother, was just discovered recently, had to come to Trenton for high school because up until, I forget when, the 1940s, there was no school for African American students who wanted to go to high school, so they came to Trenton. F. Scott Fitzgerald, when he wanted to go drinking on weekends, on Fridays, he would get on the trolley, come from Princeton into Trenton to the bars. There was a back and forth. It was a regional thing. What strikes me is, and this is great evidence and data from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the New Jersey Health Initiative, that the life expectancy in Trenton is almost 10 years less than it is in Princeton, and they're separated by 14 miles. So that's exactly what you're talking about. How can we increase the life chances and better the lives of everybody? And I would argue, let's work on not just in Trenton, but embedded in the larger region. And so anything that brings the communities together and lets us sort of leverage what's already there, I think is a step in that direction, working with communities themselves. They've got to lead this because every community has different needs.
You know, what's interesting about what's coming out here is that when you take a community like Trenton, right, and sort of systemically destroy it, turn it into a ghetto, which is pretty much what was done about, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago with redlining and things like that, okay? When you do that, what happens, what fills that gap are 800 nonprofit organizations, because social services, you know, is now what guides the commerce in the region when real commerce leaves, right? So in the process of creating this ghetto, now they've left us with 800 nonprofits, right? And if we're willing to all work together, we can create, Ruben, we can create the answer to your question, you know, which is to take these 800 nonprofits that resulted, you know, from basically ruining a town, to galvanize together and work towards offering replacement for those kids on the street corner, right? So if you have, in other words, if you take something from Princeton and shove it into Trenton, having a ballet studio on the corner is not going to take kids off that corner. You understand? So it has to be a whole community thing. And what we're talking about here with community schools is where these nonprofits work within this central hub. I've been waiting for a central hub for so long where the nonprofits could collect, you know, because we're just too fragmented. So what we're saying is that here we're providing this central hub now. We'll fund, the first thing that gets funded is the human being who is the coordinator, right? We assess it regionally and try to create an environment where people would want to keep coming to the school, where we would make it, you know, a community place. Right. You know, and then little by little, what you described, and I want to tell you, your point is very well taken. Comparing gangs in Trenton to gangs in Princeton really isn't a thing, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I wasn't trying to do that. I was simply saying that they do exist in Princeton. But the larger answer to your question is taking these 800 nonprofits and using them within this model. Because this is a framework. You're going for the state funding, you're getting the federal funding, it's starting to happen, it's real. If all of us in the nonprofit world would just embrace it, you know, and be willing to work along with the schools, and the schools would be willing to work along, you know, with us, this is something that could actually work. Probably take a few years, you know.
But one other thing I would say is that every community has all these strengths that they can leverage.
That's right.
And so it's a two-way street. You know, having a better relationship with the suburbs and the urban areas and the rural areas, that's wonderful for the suburban students to be exposed to, for example, some of the great artists here in Trenton who there are programs who come out and teach both Trenton students and Princeton students. And that's wonderful, right? That's that exchange, you know, and that's what we need. That's what we need for all our young people.
Right, right. And you know to what extent that's happening now? It really sucks. That somebody from a wealthier community will get 3 artists from Trenton to tag the side of his wall, right? And then have a picture taken, and now it's a photo op. Look what I did for these poor kids. I let them write on my wall. Give them, you know, $50 or no money at all, and turn it into a huge profit gain for them. And that just ultimately down the road, that just makes people resent them.
Or even like in the summertime where like lower income families like in Trenton and stuff like that, they might have somebody in Princeton or in the higher part of Lawrenceville because they might have a big pool for summer camp because they donate the house for the pool.
Right.
And the kids can use the pool, you know, because the family was generous to let the community center or something like that use the pool for the kids.
Yeah, so yay, why don't they do better in school now that they can use the pool?
Pool, exactly.
You know, it just doesn't connect. It just doesn't connect properly.
Just like with like in cities, you know, like Trenton, Camden, and so forth. You know, it's amazing the disparity, and I think you're probably going to talk about this on your next segment, like how there's you know, there's churches and liquor stores on every corner, but yet it doesn't seem like it really benefits any of the communities. And as in Trenton, and it's nothing but the nonprofits, because a lot of people do things, you know, for nonprofits in the city. And just like you said, if they can't connect with each other, how can the nonprofits, you know, help out in those communities more? You know, or is it just like lack of information, or communities are not interested?
They can only help to a point, and that's why having this hub, you know, is something that's really valuable, because a nonprofit can only help out to the extent at which it is funded to publicize what it does and reach out. Here we have a hub where that can be established. Unfortunately, sir, there is no next segment. We're out of time tonight. One of us is watching the clock, Ruben. Greg Stankiewicz, such a pleasure having you here. I'm just so wonderfully glad that I got to meet you a few weeks ago, and I hope you'll come back and you know, sort of keep us posted. You can come in person or call in or anything anytime.
I would love that. I really would.
When there's new developments. I just wanted to take 1 minute and talk about something else. So give me 1 minute here, because I want people out there to understand one thing about trauma tonight, because a lot of the problems that we have with young people, trauma is at their root, and citizens of the community and donors to our nonprofits, I think need to gain a realistic perspective on what success looks like. And this prompted in my mind because a person that I was speaking to last week was a foster child who had been severely traumatized. And it so happened that that person was like absolutely brilliant, and they were able to work through all of their trauma and have a professional career. But being functional doesn't have necessarily have a relationship to being stable inside your head. And people need to understand that trauma can go on for years and years and years. And what this person, who was a very respected professional, said to me is, I was 50 before I started coming to terms with my trauma. And I hear this from young people occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally a young person will say to me, there are some days I just can't get out of bed. There are some days I just can't get dressed. There are some days I just can't get out the door. And you have to realize that the level of trauma that some of these folks experienced is so much more dramatic and painful than anything that you can imagine. And I can recant things to you right now that, you know, will sound like a horror film, but I don't want to do that. I just want you to understand that they've had experiences that we can't understand. And something else too, when some people experience trauma, they get through it. That's just their personality. When other people experience trauma, they don't get through it. They may never get through it. It may be an obstacle that stays with them for the rest of their lives. So success, when you're working with young people like that, in many instances, success means we've kept them alive for another day, for another week, for another month. And, you know, maybe when they're 50, you know, they'll start to come to terms with that and say, okay, you know, I can stop this being an obstacle in my life and I can move forward. And that's why one of the things that we say at Age Out Angels that we never, ever give up on a child. Never, ever. And when I say child, the older I get, the younger they look. So I'm talking about people who are 20, 30, 40 years old. We never, ever give up on a human being because everyone out there is worthwhile. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, another hour talking about youth who should matter more in our political and economic discourse than they do. And we thank you so much for tuning in and maybe helping us spread the word. I hope you hit the share button. Again, we offer humble thanks to Hamilton Radio, to my most excellent guest, Greg Stankiewicz, coordinator of the New Jersey Community Schools Coalition. Thanks to our engineer, Ruben, our producer, Robin, music provided by Kurt Seldom-Ridge, owner-operator of the Cave Rehearsal Recording Space in Pennsylvania. Our webmaster is Carmen Garcia Valera, and our social media specialist is Bailey Braverman. Join me next Monday, next week, December 10th. Adoptions from the Heart will be here. We're going to talk about adopting, along with Peg Gold. Peg is from Mercer County Community College. We're going to talk about the state of current education, where that's gotten us to this point. So until then, Greg, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Until then, let's make this week the best week ever. Have a great evening. Good night. Wow, fantastic.